You always have to balance. And I think it goes to many people that are in C-level positions. When I got the CFO role, I worked around the clock. When I started, I felt like doing sports was quote unquote wasting time. And I started feeling bad. Since then, I've gone a long way and I make sure that I find time for physical activity. It allows me to keep that mental state to deal with everything we need to deal with.
Hey there, Lee, the Team Nation. Welcome back to another great episode. Today I have for you Guy Melamed, who is the CFO and COO over at Varonis Systems. And if you're not familiar with them, well, you should be. They're a global cybersecurity company that protects the vault, which is your data. And they've been through two very big transformations throughout their history. And it's a pretty interesting story behind them. And I'll let Guy explain a little bit about that. But also, Guy was actually the first Israeli to get drafted and played in Major League Soccer here in the U.S. And he was with the Colorado Rapids after receiving both a BA and MSA from Boston College. Guy, welcome to Lead the Team.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So what was your first job and how does it influence your leadership today?
Well, I think you can't really call it a job playing soccer. But if you tie playing soccer both in college and kind of the whole journey that involves being a collegiate athlete, I think it very much ties to how you have to manage a team. So if you go back to kind of my time at Boston College, I truly remember the days where we would sit straight after the practice and try and figure out who's down, who needs help, and who's slightly cocky because they had a really good game and they're kind of out of shape and need to be put back into the ground. And if you tie it to how kind of managing a team, it very much fits in the sense of being able to address each and every team member. What is their position? Where do they want to get to? How are they maneuvering the day-to-day? Do they need help? Do they need like a lift in spirits, or do they need actually to be more focused? So I think that's kind of in a way something that I've taken with me throughout the journey of just trying to figure out when you look at your team as a sports team, and it doesn't matter if it's soccer or basketball or any other team, a lot of the elements that fit into a sports team kind of happen in the day-to-day business arena as well.
Yeah, I can see a lot of overlaps. And it sounds like you really, one of the things you picked up on was you need to, as a leader, you need to understand where each person on your team is from a motivation standpoint, from a focus standpoint, sort of like a little assessment. And then you rally the troops to help them. How does that work on a larger scale international company? Because I can see on a soccer team, but when you get into your space and there's so many darn people and it's global in nature, how do you get to see? How do you get to know the people to that degree, or do you have to lean on your direct reports, or how do you approach it?
So first of all, in your interaction with your direct reports, I think everyone needs to understand why they're doing what they're doing. It's one thing to give instructions. It's another thing to truly make sure that they understand why you're doing it. And I think when you explain why changes are happening, it's much easier for them to defend it in front of their team members. And it's just like, if you take the analogy of a soccer team, everyone knows what needs to happen. That message is very clear. The question is, how are we going to do it? And that's why you have a coach in that sense. So the explanation of what is going to be the path to get there needs to be very clearly communicated. And we were fortunate enough to go through a transition that happened at Varonis very, very quickly. And we can talk about that later on.
So what is it? Yeah, riff on that. I want to come back to your soccer days in a second, but since we're here, let's hear.
So we're a cybersecurity company that tries to deal with protecting sensitive data. And when we kind of view it, we're protecting the vault. People try and get in. In 2018, we had a perpetual model business. So we would sell licenses that the customers could keep, and they would pay maintenance that was 20% of the license price. In 2019, we decided to transition and move to an on-prem subscription model. So they would technically, quote unquote, lease the license. It was much more beneficial for the customers because they could consume more of the product, but it was also very beneficial for us because then you get that recurring revenue stream. And that transition for successful companies that have done it in the past takes anywhere between 4 to 6 years. We were actually able to transition within 5 quarters. So the record speed that we were able to move through was quite the adventure. Definitely many lessons that I've taken from that transition in life, I would say. But a major part of us being able to transition was the communication that went through our customers, our partners, our employees on why we're doing it, what's the benefit for them, and what are the pains that we're going to go through in order to get there.
Okay. That's a heck of an acceleration from 5 to 6 years to 5 quarters. And you're saying, so explaining the why, making sure they understood the bigger reason. And I assume that was more helpful than telling them exactly what to do during the transition. They were able to figure it out themselves and be more creative. Is that the gist of it?
And I can tell you that in some of the team members, you had to not only make sure that they buy into it, but they also had to think that it was their idea. Eventually, when you get to a point where you're trying to convince someone and then they think that it was their idea, it's the best thing that can happen. That worked very well for us. But eventually, I think one of the key components, apart from the technology and our commitment to moving and kind of ripping off the Band-Aid as quickly as we could, was the fact that we were able to communicate things very clearly, internally and externally.
Yeah, very cool, man. I think a lot of leaders think about that. You get so obsessed with the project plan of, hey, this is the transition we're making, here are all the nuts and bolts, that having the more inspirational, bigger picture message gets lost. And when times get tough, things get difficult, the transition, there might have been some haywire kind of moments. You need like your North Star, like, hey, this is where we're going, y'all. This is why we're doing it for the company. It sounds like it worked really, really well for y'all.
And it also gives you the confidence to make that change after you've spoken to so many people about it. You get everyone to buy in. So when we announced the transition in our earning call, the stock took a hit, and we knew it would take a hit. But you had to make sure that everyone would know in advance that this is kind of part of the drill. You don't look at the short term, you look at the longer term. What is it going to give us as an organization, and why this is just kind of a bump that we need to overlook and move forward.
So you anticipated the stock would take a hit, and you said, hey, y'all expect this. And when it happened, you didn't lose people, you didn't lose morale because it was expected, and you were more proactive on addressing it, or what was the?
Everyone was very committed to that change. I'm not going to say it was a fun day in the office, but it was definitely something that didn't impact our focus and our desire to continue with that transition.
Well, bold. So the markets looked at it as, okay, they're changing their revenue model. A lot of companies fail. Or what? Why did you anticipate such a stock hit on that day?
Because investors don't like uncertainty, and you need to, once you announce a transition, you have to be able to show that you're able to do that transition. So I think there were a lot of investors that didn't want to go through the process, but we also got a lot of new base of investors that enjoyed the idea of how you could benefit from such a transition. So there was heavy volume that day, and definitely we had to over communicate with investors as well once we announced it. So we had a lot of conversations with potential investors and ones that were existing ones, and I'm glad we were able to actually prove that we could transition nicely.
Yeah, I mean, once you go through that, but one of the things I think about in that is leaders need to be able to think the bigger picture, need to think down the road, sort of play the long game. And you guys do the long game. We're committed to this. We've got to get our team committed to this. We see this challenge happening. And you change some investors, right? Some investors say, I'm not into that model, I don't buy it, but you're able to get the word out so much that you're going to attract other ones and come through it stronger. So huge congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean, man, I wish everyone would be thinking about that. It's one thing for leaders too, to be able to think long term, but it's a completely different deal to be able to communicate that to people, get them to buy in, to bring them along. And yeah, next level. Whenever you're talking to investors about the bigger picture and you're about to make this kind of jump, what's your advice to leaders who might be thinking, man, I've got some big moves I need to make and to bring my investors, I need to bring my team along with it?
Well, first of all, you need to feel good about that change. You need to truly be committed to making the change if you want to make it. If you don't have full agreement within leadership that that is the right thing to do, you will be cut to pieces by your employees. Because in a way, think about it, like if you have in parenthood, what do kids do when they get the no? They go to the other parent to see if they can get the yes. So the same happens with your employees, especially with your sales team. That and we can talk more about that as well. But your sales team, if you're making a change, you have to really think about what is it for them, how could they benefit from it, and make sure that you're fully aligned from a leadership perspective. Now, we're lucky that the leadership at Varonis has been together for many, many years. I think that's one of the benefits of the company, that we've worked together, we know each other, we're very committed, same values. So all of that has worked very well, and that really allowed us to kind of set things straight in anticipation of this big change.
Yeah, I'm just writing a note now, getting your company through a major transition. And you got to sell your investors and your customers so they stick with you. Well, you're making a good reminder, hey, don't forget to sell your employees on the thing, because you'll lose them. And sometimes the hardest people to sell are the actual salespeople, and get them bought in on this thing. I can keep talking about that, but I don't want to get too far away from MLS background, because I want to know, what's it like being the first person from your country to get drafted into a major league sport, soccer, and here in the U.S.
So it was pretty cool, to be honest.
I hope so.
I never thought when I went to college to play soccer at BC that I would get to the MLS. It wasn't the intention. The intention was to try and kind of get a degree while kind of I got a full ride because of sports.
Well, okay.
But as the years progressed, it kind of became an option. And when that became an option, it was definitely something that I wanted to try out. So achieving it was very enjoyable. But I can say that at the end of that first year, I also faced kind of a junction where I had to make a decision. Do I pursue this even further, or do I go to the exciting profession of accounting? Because I had an offer from KPMG at the time, which I put on hold. And I kind of chose the exciting job of accounting over soccer. And I haven't regretted that either. So it was fun. I enjoyed it, but I felt that the right thing to do for me at the time was to kind of move to work and gain experience at what could help me further on in life.
Wow. So that's big news. So you were Major League Soccer. You made it to the pinnacle of sport, at least in North America, right? People here would say that's the dream. It may not have been your dream. I don't know. I mean, was it your dream to play Major League Soccer?
It was a dream.
You're in there, you're doing it, and then you're like, I'm going to go do accounting. What was it? A hard decision? Was it like a financial decision? Like playing the long game, like you do at work on this stuff? Like,
it was a combination. I think that Major League Soccer, when I played, was very different. When you joined Major League Soccer outside of college or straight after college, salaries were significantly lower than what they are today. I can just say that the offer that I got from public accounting was double the salary that I got with.
That made an easier decision.
So, and I was a 21-year-old freshman. So when I finished college, I was much older than kind of rookies that came straight out of college. If they didn't have to go through the path that I went through. So it got to a point where I had to make a decision. Where do I see myself at the age of 30, 40, and after that? And it just made more sense to kind of go through the process. And I never thought I wanted to be kind of an accountant or a partner in a big four firm, but I knew that that was the highway where you can truly learn kind of the language of business, and I haven't regretted that decision. So
Yeah, obviously it's a huge brand and probably a great experience for you. What did you learn at KPMG that helped fuel you to where you are today? Because certainly I mean, you're CFO and COO, so you're not going to get too far away from accounting, mister. But what did you learn in that accounting experience that helped you as an executive?
So I work with KPMG, and then I work with EY in Israel, and I can say that you learn so many things. I actually learned different things during the kind of based on the level that you enter. I think initially you learn how big systems work, how the operations at scale have the ability to work and actually perform in an efficient and productive way. You also learn the importance of being organized and the schedule around it, and making sure that kind of the interface with customers when you provide them service. It's very hard to provide service in the right level that keeps your customer, quote unquote, happy. And I think that one of the things that you have to do in accounting is learn how to provide service in the right way. And I know that's not tied to accounting, but in a way it's tied more to life. And that was fascinating. But in terms of the actual accounting part, it's really the kind of the language of business. The P&L, understanding the P&L, the cash flow, balance sheet is something that could help you in understanding how to build a budget, or just having a conversation about if something makes sense or not. I think the most important thing that I've learned over my career is really how to try and solve problems. In our job, in our position, you have to answer to 200, 300 questions, problem solvings a day. And you have to understand what's important and what's less important, where to put the focus, where to put your time, look at the big picture, but also look at the details. And I think you can learn all of that through the experiences. It's not from up high. You have to deal with everyone specifically to kind of dig in and better understand how to deal with it.
Yeah, being willing to go into the details. And no doubt at your consulting days and accounting days, that's part of the game, is understanding the business at a granular level. And I really particularly like what you said, and I hear this emerge in a lot of our interviews with leaders, like, hey, you got to speak the language of business, not just the language of accounting or HR or marketing. It's that learning that vernacular, and it's like learning different languages. And the more multilingual in business you can become, the more powerful you can become as an executive. Let's see here. What's your most colorful story of when someone quit or was fired?
Okay. So actually that story ties to the transition that we did in 2019, moving from perpetual to on-prem subscription. And one of the things that we did when we announced the transition was change kind of the whole commission plan. Because if you have a sales organization that you want them to shift from one place to the other, you have to make sure that you're aligning your commission plans and how they can make money to what fits your strategic desire as an organization.
Yep.
Because if they're neutral, they will never change their behavior. Because why would they? They're used to it. It's a habit. And in a way, you have to align it to a point where they can actually make more money, but they have to change kind of their move. And one of the things that we introduced when we announced that transition was a grading table. What does it mean? It basically means that if you sell the product at a discount that is good for the organization, you could make $1.20 for every dollar that you sell. But if you sell at a really high discount, you could actually be penalized and only make 50 cents on the dollar. And the logic behind that is that we win and lose together. If you do it right, you can make more money. But if you do it not in a beneficial way for the organization, then, and that's the best that you can do, that's fine. But you kind of take the pain of making less money. And we aligned it together with the transition because we wanted to make sure that with the additional sales of licenses, with transforming to that model, we wanted them to make sure that they do it the right way. Some of the reps, some of the sales personnel don't like change. And I think that's kind of normal. And you can see it on every person, that there are people that are embrace change and enjoy it, and others that are more fearful of change. And we had a sales rep that really didn't like that change. They were very feisty about it, and they didn't like that grading table. And you can imagine, this is Q1 of 2019. We just announced the transition. Everyone's trying to make sure that we do it the right way. And a couple of days before the end of the quarter, that rep contacts us and lets us know that he has a PO, but he wants to make sure that we won't grade him based on the new grading table, but rather based on the old grading table. And this was a PO, I think it was, I'm not exactly sure if it was 70K or 100K, but it was pretty significant for us. And that sales personnel wants confirmation. Obviously, we're not going to give that type of confirmation. We made a change. We are committed to the change. A day goes by, he sends another note, and he says, well, can you please confirm? Because I'm not submitting this PO. I'm keeping it in my inbox.
He's negotiating.
He's negotiating.
Okay. All right.
And we said, no, please submit the PO. We want to process it before the end of the quarter. And he's like, well, no, I need the confirmation. Another day goes by, we still don't get the PO. Last day of the quarter comes by, we don't get the PO. We ask him whether he's planning on submitting it, and he says, well, if you're not giving me the confirmation, that's not happening. We said, okay, don't submit the PO. So we didn't get the PO. And then April 1st comes by, and we we fired him. We put a letter out there that we fired him. He actually did something. He kind of claimed he was sick, that he had a heart attack that day, and he can't be fired. But I'd say that luckily, this was a crazy story.
I was on my deathbed. That's why I didn't submit it.
So he actually said that he had a heart attack that day, but he showed up in the office, and because he showed up in the office, the claim that he had a heart attack didn't hold true. So we were actually able to fire him, and guess what? The rest of the team kind of followed the fact that we're making that change. This is the way we're acting, and everyone kind of followed since. So that was
crazy story, great story. And yeah, if you're going to claim you had a heart attack, it's not good to show up on the day you have the heart attack. Unless it's like happening at work or something. Or not to make light of a heart attack, but I mean, all right. So, wow. One, on the negotiation front, I kind of admire someone who would ask the first time, let's just see. But you have to understand your leverage. And this person obviously did not understand the leverage idea in the negotiation. This idea, and I years ago, I've been in sales in a similar style role. And one of the most frustrating things of a sales leader is when you do change a comp plan, because you kind of have a mindset, like, this is what I'm selling. I'm selling these products. And you're kind of working towards a formula, and change can be really, really painful in that. But I like this grading table idea, and I think this is a powerful message in this for people to think about, is that you equipped these sales leaders to really own their own business. Like, yeah, you can sell at a deeper discount. And it's easier to sell at a deeper discount because things are less expensive, right? However, you're going to share in that pain that you're not going to be as incentivized. And if you're able to sell it at a lower discount, you're going to benefit. And I think that's a very wise transition. I'm curious from your standpoint, did you see most of the sales team really embrace it as now this is my business? And did you see the behaviors change on the discount offerings?
100%. There's a lot of analysis that we did on this, and the grading table works perfectly. One of the things that we try to do is that when reps actually they put in the quote and they see what the grading table is, not only do they know how much they will make based on that discount, but they also get what is the dollar amount that gets them to the next grading level.
So data is power. And that's also a big frustration in sales world is you're selling, but you don't really know how much you're making on the deal because it's so muddy. And even the companies not necessarily usually, they don't really know until the end of the quarter, end of the month. And it sounds like you're able to bring your accounting background into this and get to the specificity and knowing that, okay, yeah, sales leaders, it's going to be a painful transition, but we're going to help them by giving them better transparency.
It was better transparency. And also we paid them more on selling on-prem subscription versus perpetual because we wanted to make sure that they understand where is this company going. And honestly, there was some reps that just didn't buy into this change, but we parted ways, and that's fine. It's better to part ways at the beginning of a transition than have them stay for a year or two and then kind of figure out that they're not buying in. So we made sure that we were very clear in where we're going, and if they wanted to be on board, we would more than welcome that. But if they didn't, that was fine as well.
Yeah, quiet quitting comes to mind. We transitioned. Well, you actually quit during the transition, but no one knew it for a whole year until we saw your numbers. Like, oh, you quitted 12 months ago. So when's the time you had an unexpected twist or failure in your career, and how did it lead to your success or growth on down the road?
So I think that goes back to kind of my soccer career, my soccer time. And this was when I was kind of a teenager. I played, and I had a coach that really didn't like me. And reasons are, put them aside. We can spend another time on that one. But they really behaved differently to different team members. So, give you an example. They would come in the morning and they would only say hi to the players that they liked, and they didn't say hi to the others. But we would stand one next to the other. And that was a very difficult time because you need to find ways to deal with that. And you need to kind of build the character to put aside the personal feelings that you have. And I truly remember kind of me having to deal with myself on how do I make sure that it doesn't impact me outside soccer, because you start kind of doubting yourself. You start doubting kind of the behavior and what you're doing. There were all sorts of stories, and it was kind of they were yelling and screaming up. It was a very, very difficult time because sometimes they wanted to just show kind of the rest of the team members that they were in control, and they would find the players that they didn't like to make sure that they kind of passed that message. The one thing I can say is that when I finished that season, I felt the strongest I could be, because I said, if I overcame this one, I can truly overcome anything that comes my way. And I think that in retrospect, that was the coach that I've learned the most from, because in terms of building character, it was leaps and bounds more than other coaches that in a way contributed more to my, in how you should behave. But the ones that didn't behave well actually helped me build character and helped in life.
So do you think, looking back on that, do you think your coach did it, quote, the right way, or they did it the wrong way? You just were able to dig deep and learn the lesson from it.
Oh, they absolutely did it the wrong way. I would never, ever want to treat anyone 50% of the way they treated people. But I think that in a way, if you can find kind of the place to dig in and build that character, then you feel that you can manage more difficult things going forward.
A very, very powerful perspective. It's easy to have those difficult life experiences. And there's one thing, it's like, hey, you have the difficult life experiences, you get through them. Everyone's, usually had a very difficult bad boss or something, or like a bad coach early on. And you kind of got through it and you move on. But I think, and that's great that people, survive that. But I think the ones that really, like you did, really do the deeper work to glean, what did I learn from that? What does that mean about me and what I'm possible, what the greater possibilities are because I did get through that. I think use it as fuel for the next level. What was there in those darker moments and during that time, I mean, what was your inspiration? Was it a person? Was it a song? Was it something you're reading? I mean, what did you call on during those early days that season?
I was trying to stay busy outside soccer, and I think that's what kept me sane. I was kind of a student at the time. I think I was actually learning I don't remember if I was learning for the SATs or one exam. So I kind of placed a lot of time on the studies, and that allowed me to kind of distance myself and not dig into the kind of the mental challenges outside of the day-to-day that were related to the soccer practices. So I think that was very helpful for me. I think you always have to balance, and one of the things that I've learned, and I think it goes to many people that are in C-level positions. When I got the CFO role, I worked around the clock, and it's not that I don't work around the clock now, but when I started, I felt like that doing sports was in a quote unquote wasting time because I need to accomplish everything that I have on my plate. So I kind of neglected the whole taking care of my body and taking care of the physical aspects of that. And I started feeling bad. And it actually started impacting kind of the way I think, the way I deal with stress. And I can tell you that since then, I've gone a long way, and I make sure that I find time for physical activity, whether it's walking, whether it's trying to do some sort of sports. Now, I'm not training every day, and I don't spend 4 hours in the gym. I wish I could, but at least making sure that I do enough that it allows me to keep that mental state to deal with everything we need to deal with.
Love that. You learned that early on. Yeah, diversify, have balance. And yeah, I love how, and if one thing's not going great in one domain, you can lean into the other, right? You could look like the soccer stuff wasn't going as well. You were diversifying into school, and it's there's an interview with Richard Branson that I still think about today. And he's getting peppered with all these questions. Well, what do you do when your business is not going well? And he says, I work out. How are you handling the stress? Because this happened. And if you ever read Sir Richard Branson's autobiographies, I mean, he has had a lot of ups and downs. I know it just seems everybody's like, oh, he owns an island. And I'm like, no, it's been bad for him. But he keeps responding to all these questions. He's like, I just work out. And having that's something that he can control. And I think a lot of people feel out of control at work sometimes because there's changes going on. But finding that thing that you can control, like it was your SAT prep back in the day, or now you get your workout in. Reminding ourselves of that, of what we can control and doing something about it, sure does help us feel better.
Definitely. And also thinking positively. If you think about how things can get better and what you need to do in order to make things better, I think that's very helpful. And I see it with my kids. I see it with team members, and I see it with friends. The people that have the growth mindset, that are embracing change, and think about the positivity, it's going to be much easier for them to deal with it. And those that think about the negative aspects of things and why it can't work, well, guess what? It's not going to work.
So books, gadgets, podcasts, music, what's something maybe for our listeners that helps you foster this positive mindset, productivity? What comes up?
So there's plenty, honestly. If we're talking about mindset, I think one book that's very helpful is actually called Mindset, which the concept is in a way pretty straightforward. But it talks about the different characters and how to deal with a fixed mindset and how to deal with a growth mindset.
Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck.
Yeah. And it just helps you kind of take the tips on how to deal with the practical matter of those types of challenges. I think another, in terms of podcasts, I love Howard Marks's memos. They're very interesting, very good perspective, and his books have been very enjoyable as well. I'll give one more book that really helped in terms of presentations. It's called Made to Stick by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. And I think that my style of presentation, whether it's in front of a team or in front of big crowds, is before reading that book and after reading that book. So I think those have been very helpful.
And that book, Made to Stick, I am a huge fan of that book too. In fact, when I wrote The Quit Alternative, I used the same framework that they used to write their table of contents. If you want to see a nonfiction book that has a very good table of contents, and some people may be rolling their eyes, table of contents, but for a nonfiction book, most people don't finish it. And having a very good table of contents can really make a difference if your idea sticks. And those guys know what they're doing. So check that out. Whew. All right, Guy, thank you for coming on. You got one last parting thought for our listeners, for like a cherry on top of the interview? Take it where you want.
Always keep learning would be my if I had to give any recommendation, if anyone would ever listen. But I think that we never stop to learn, or we should always continue learning no matter what position we're in. There's always more things that I want to know about and kind of dig into. And I think that desire of learning constantly and keeping good people around you is kind of the essence of happiness.
Thanks for coming on today, Guy.